I'm Steve Wilkerson, and I'm with Jim Saunders, Executive Editor of the News Service of Florida. Jim, Governor Scott will be presenting his 2014 budget recommendations this week, but he's really traveled all over the state making various announcements about how he's going to spend pretty large sums of money in the run-up to this presentation. Let's talk about some of those.
Yeah, they've been sort of like campaign announcements almost. I mean, he's been holding press conferences all over the place and talking about things that are really popular. The latest has been a major proposal for education spending. He wants to increase it for the K-12 system by $542 million, I think it is, next year. He's pitched proposals to clean up springs, the water springs, to increase transportation funding, to help with projects around Lake Okeechobee, which are a real big issue down there in that region of the state. And those are some of the things.
How about the license fee proposal?
Yeah, and that doesn't even get into his proposal or his plan to cut $500 million in taxes and fees, which the biggest chunk of that is about $400 million would be to reduce vehicle registration fees that the legislature and, oh, by the way, Charlie Crist approved in 2009. So he's thrown a lot of stuff out there already.
Well, where are the dollars for these coming from? You mentioned the cut in, the presumed excess revenue projected from the economic forecasters, and I guess you could also talk about cuts somewhere in the budget, but we're talking about a lot of money, right?
Well, that's sort of the thing that I think is going to be the most interesting when he actually does release his full budget proposal. Basically, I mean, these are rough numbers, but basically they have about $1 billion in extra revenue to deal with for the 14-15 projected for the 14-15 year. But if you take $500 million in fees and tax cuts, and you take $500 million in education additional spending, that pretty much takes up $1 billion. So, the devil's, I hate the cliche, but the devil's going to be in the details of how he actually funds some of these things. And he could make some cuts in some areas of the budget that we don't know about at this point. There was one telling sort of thing in the legislative committee recently. A senator started questioning the Department of Health secretary very much about his budget. And she couldn't quite get a straight answer. She was trying to ask him about whether he's going to increases or decreases. So, there's probably some things out there that we just don't know about at this point.
Well, one thing we do know, this is an election year, and Governor Scott's running for re-election, and his likely opponent will be former Republican Governor Charlie Crist, who's now running as a Democrat. And some of these budget recommendations are politically driven, right? What are some of the most politically driven budget issues?
Well, I think clearly the most, in-your-face one is rolling back these vehicle registration fees. Charlie Crist and Republican legislators, we need to remember that, but they increased these vehicle registration fees in 2009 when the budget was in a terrible situation and they needed revenue. But the registration fee increases were very unpopular. Now, in an election year, the governor is proposing a total repeal of what was approved in 2009. So, that not only does it get him some popularity with the people, but it also, allows him to argue, Charlie Crist raised these fees, I'm going to cut them. There are other issues like education funding. That's always popular politically to throw more, put more money in the education system. And then, as we discussed, some of these regional issues. Springs are a big issue in parts of North Florida. The Lake Okeechobee pollution types of issues are a big issue in Southeast Florida. So, you kind of have to look at it all in sort of combination. The other thing is, going to the political question is, quite often the governor's budget recommendations don't wind up meaning that much because the legislature can take them and do what it wants with them. But some of these issues like vehicle registration fees and education spending, the legislature's probably going to look real hard at approving what Scott wants because he's a Republican governor and they're a Republican legislature.
Also, on a different subject, Republican Congressman Trey Radel from the Fort Myers, Naples area resigned. Today, we're talking together on Monday of this week, he had entered a guilty plea for trying to buy cocaine from an undercover agent in Washington, D.C. He had talked about staying on but he resigned. Who are some of the names looking at trying to replace him?
Well, one of the big names flying around Tallahassee is Elizabeth Benaquisto. She's a Senate Majority Leader in the state Senate. She's from Fort Myers, and she's a proven fundraiser, and she's very popular among the Republican senators in Tallahassee. And there's a lot of speculation that she will run. Already in the made clear he's going to run is former State Representative Paige Kriegel, who is a physician. He's a doctor. He's from, I believe it's Punta Gorda or Charlotte County. And so he's already made clear he's going to run. One other name that's just kind of floating out there, and it's hard to tell whether he's interested or not, is Connie Mack, the former congressman from that area. He ran for U.S. Senate in 2012 and lost to Bill Nelson, but he could run again. And the reality is, whoever wins the Republican primary down there is probably going to be the next congressman.
Thank you, Jim. For more news about Florida politics and government, visit the Advances section of our website.